Perfect. Thank you so much.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for attending. The plan for today is I will share with you some information when it comes to cloud native cloud security, which are the results of the survey and the reporting on application security, which Palo Alto Networks released very recently. They are actually valid for the last calendar year, 2023, and since we're just in the January, end of the January, but still, this is pretty fresh. So I hope that it could be, let's say, inspirational for you, but also it might ignite some good conversations when it comes to best practices and what's needed currently when it comes to application security. My intention is also to share with you a little bit certain ideas, certain concerns, but also what some of the customers are telling to us during the discussions. This is a pain point, or this is absolutely critical from my perspective when it comes to application security nowadays. So feel free to chip in if you have any additional, let's say, questions, remarks, good ideas, or your approach is a little bit different. Like mentioned, you're highly encouraged to exchange those opinions and we can have a conversation about it. Or I hope at least I will leave some food for thought for you. I will introduce myself very quickly, not to spend too much time on it, but I think also a little bit of my story. It's kind of tying nicely into how the security market is changing, because I used to be an infrastructure firewall gal for most of my professional career. And like it was mentioned at the beginning, I started to work at Palo Alto Networks. It was more than a decade ago. And I was an engineer taking care of the firewall business. And during this time, security was pretty easy, right? So you were able to, for example, implement, making it very simple, but a firewall, which ideally had the maximum visibility into the traffic which you would like to protect, which was traversing your network. So some of the customers were going for the concept of putting the firewall in front when it comes to accessing their network, in front of a data center as well, absolutely. But the very nice concept, which also Palo Alto Networks was promoting for years, was a zero trust concept. Zero trust, as you can, maybe some of you have heard about it. Zero trust was meaning that we're absolutely not trusting anyone. We are imposing a total control and producing a very explicit rules, which are allowing traffic for certain users to certain applications, or for example, parts of the applications. Rest of the traffic is being blocked. And for all the traffic which we are enabling in our infrastructure, we are adding additional security profiles to double check if we are not allowing any threats to come into our network. And it actually worked pretty well. Visibility was the first step, so having the full visibility into the infrastructure, learning how the communication looks like, and based on it, creating sufficient policy rules with additional profiles if needed. The issue is currently, and it started already some time ago, that networks became much, much more complex, especially when it comes to potential migration to the cloud. I'm not so sure how is it in your particular cases, but definitely we cannot deny when it comes to, let's say, adoption of public cloud usage in the infrastructure. Since I'm covering Eastern European region, my feeling is that we are not that early adopters, let's put it nicely, when it comes to the public cloud, but also from the perspective of, let's say, managing our data privacy. In many cases, what I'm seeing is the hybrid infrastructure. So part of the infrastructure, part of the application is remaining on-prem, and part is, for example, like front end, which is being anyways accessed by the customers. this is being, for example, maintained in the public cloud. But as you can imagine, this is making the whole infrastructure from the security perspective, from management perspective, even more complicated. And even if you have a fantastic firewall, if you're extending it, if you're extending your infrastructure into the public cloud, this firewall won't be enough. But even for the customers who are more into on-premise infrastructure, to just focus on, let's say, hardware protection is absolutely not sufficient anymore. In the meantime, I had a fantastically valuable experience of working at VMware. And as you can imagine, if you look at, let's say, virtualized environment, from the perspective of security, you're very quickly realizing that actually imposing this idea of zero trust, if your environment is virtualized, it's not so easy anymore, right? So for the more technical people in the audience, especially if you have, for example, distributed layer 2, your network, your infrastructure is virtualized, and for example, your virtual machines, they can more or less freely communicate. It's becoming a little bit complicated when it comes to implementing, for example, a hardware firewall there. Of course, there are some customers who are going into the direction of redirecting the traffic and, for example, using private VLANs, right? But from operational perspective, it's extra complicated. And if you think about an increase of workloads, which are, for example, connected to containers, not mentioning, for example, serverless functions, you're ending up with loads of workloads which have quite of a freedom when it comes to internal communication, and not that many tools, not that many traditional tools, let me rephrase it, which are allowing us, if needed, to push for sufficient security measures inside of the environment, right? So from this perspective, even Palo Alto Networks, let's say a very traditional firewall vendor, if you look like it at a company like this, we needed to admit that the concept of zero trust, if customer would really like to have it implemented in their modern network infrastructure, you need a little bit of a different approach to do it effectively. And also to do it in a way that it's actually working and allowing you full visibility, also in the public cloud, but also to the, let's say, virtualized, containerized on-prem environment. So let me speak about it a little bit. I will actually refer to the report which we have released very recently when it comes to certain challenges which are around modern application and also how to address. So when it comes to the report itself, as you can see, we have discussed the issues about application security with quite a bunch of the professionals, which were representing some major industry. So we're really taking care of the diversity. What is important, we really took care of that we are speaking to the people who are familiar with application concepts, who are familiar with the security, to make sure that this, let's say, that they are equally, but also sufficiently represented. What might be interesting for you is we're speaking not only to cloud security experts, but also to the developers. I will be mentioning it a lot today because one of the things which we are seeing when it comes to the change is not only the change in the parts of the infrastructure, right? So this high introduction of hybrid and public cloud infrastructures, but also on how the teams are being organized. For me, when I'm speaking to the customers and we're, for example, discussing modern security for applications, this is basically one of the first things which we're speaking about. It's not the tools, it's not the infrastructure, it's how their teams are being organized. Because with the modern applications, you have so many people who are being engaged when it comes to how the application is being developed, which tools are being used, people being also engaged into the decision process itself, that basically, with all due respect, we cannot only speak to the security people. And this is also tying very nicely to the concept of shift left, which I will also speak about. In a nutshell, not to leave anyone wondering what shift left is. Shift left is the idea of implementing security as soon as possible in the process of application lifecycle and in the process of application development. And if you think about it, then skipping the discussion, skipping the conversation with the developer is not even possible. So in many cases, and for me, this is very interesting from the, let's say, interpersonal view as well. In many cases, when we're discussing with the customers how to implement security tools, we are also having really valid conversations with the developers, which in some of the cases, things can really go south. I'll give you an example straight away. We had a really good discussion with one of the banks in the region. Security people were saying, we are getting so many issues which are sourced in the code that we need to actually control developers a little bit more. And the developers on the other side of the table, they were saying, if you are to implement any security tool to control us, you actually make us work slower. So by default, we are saying to the managers that application delivery time will decrease 20-25%. We don't know, but you're making our life harder, right? So I'm always joking that change is the only constant currently, especially when it comes to the area which we are in. But one thing is not changing that much. Security guys in many cases are really being seen as a bottleneck and a showstopper, very unfortunately. But the thing is, there are certain tools and ideas which are beneficial for both of the teams, both the DevOps developers and the security guys. I'll mention it as well. So the report is available online, so you are free to download it if you would like to dig into any details. But let me share some of let's say factors which are being mentioned here. So when it comes to the reasons why the organizations are going for migrating to the cloud or implementing cloud native tools, is in general predominantly the willingness to increase their efficiency, right? And this is also coming from the perspective of the developer. If they are able to implement the application as soon as possible, to provide the updates swiftly, the time to market from application perspective, from business perspective, is being decreased very nice, right? And to become competitive also when it comes to the market, when it comes to the modern market, this is something which you need. Extra interesting thing is that the way how we are developing the code and how companies are developing the code and applications, it has changed massively. So we can see it also as Palo Alto Networks. In the past, we had from time to time, like 2-3 times a year, a major release of the code. Currently, what we are doing is sometimes we are providing even updates every single week. Yeah, we'll communicate it to the customers, not to keep them overwhelmed, for example, once a month or every few months, and tell them, hey, this is a list of new features which are implemented already or will be within next weeks. But we are not waiting anymore, right, for this massive releases. We are willing to deliver to the customers the new features, the new updates as soon as possible. And this is actually also consistent to the survey which we have done and to the reporting, apparently more than 75% of the responders were saying that they are actually providing updates on a weekly basis. So you can imagine how much of a dynamic situation we are dealing with. And this is also very much in line, such agile approach with, let's say, those structural changes within the companies, which I was mentioning before, right? So you need to have a little bit different approach when it comes to teams cooperating together. You will have a little bit different processes. But if you have the infrastructure, which is dynamic enough to support it, then you're actually good to go and you can expand your business. This is not, however, stripping the customers from the, let's say, quite a bunch of challenges. And security, it's visible in the reporting which we have done, but also if you look at different reports on that topic, this is definitely something which is extremely important for the customers. Some of the challenges which customers are facing when it comes to cloud and cloud native is coming from the diversity of different workloads which are being present currently. So long time ago, some of you, I'm sure, remember, the applications were more siloed. Currently, we are doing it in a very distributed way and using for certain, for example, functions or sub-functions of the applications, the workloads which are suiting are us most, right? So for example, databases, my experience is most of the customers are not virtualizing them. They are staying as a non-virtualized hardware servers or databases in the cloud. You have virtual machines, you have containers, you have serverless functions to keep it very dynamic, right? So this is the one thing. As you can see, here we have 53% of cloud workloads which are being hosted in a public cloud. This is an increase from last year, as far as I remember, of 8% compared to the last year. And this platform as a service, serverless functions are predominant when it comes to the type of workload. What is actually interesting for me, especially coming from this region, is that we don't see any significant differences if we look at the regions when it comes to number of workloads hosted. So it's more or less 50 something percent, both for Americas, Asia Pacific and Japan, and EMEA region, right? So it seems like worldwide the push to the cloud is absolutely being present, probably because of all the, let's say, considerations around expanding existing products and services, and which are followed also closely with the desire to increase the effectivity. So what's interesting is that cloud native and lift and shift seem like the two most used methodologies when it comes to application deployment in the cloud. However, as you can see, still almost 1/3 of the applications are being refactored or rebuilt. I'm very curious how is your experience. I can see that for many customers, the initial, let's say, drive to the cloud and the idea, we'll just do lift and shift. This is not that easy if you have an ongoing working application, especially if your business is relying on the application itself. So it's not that easy actually to do the move. And in many cases, what I'm seeing is customers are being forced to rewrite certain parts of the application to make it ready for the cloud. In many cases, I'm seeing that the customers, if they are doing any, let's say, updates and so on, they are going for a cloud native approach. The beauty of having a container, but in many cases, even the virtual machine, is that exactly you can very easily lift and shift it if needed and change the location to make sure that this is being implemented where it's the most efficient from your perspective. What you can see here, deployment to the cloud is differing a little bit among the regions. So Americans, they seem to have a little bit higher proportion of cloud native deployment. But for example, EMEA definitely is leading if you dig into the details when it comes to lift and shift. What to keep in mind? There are very many different approaches when it comes to migrating to the public cloud or switching more into the cloud native. And more or less they are evenly distributed. So it seems like whatever rocks your boat, right? And whatever is most suitable for you. One thing, however, is, let's say, very consistent to most of the customers, both which we have, let's say, interviewed for the topic, but also from the perspective of the discussions which I'm having here locally with the customers. And that would be shift left. So I already told you that the shift left idea is we would like to implement security measures as soon in the, let's say, from the perspective of application development as possible. However, and this is also important, we don't want to skip any of the additional steps which are here. Let me tell you why it is needed and how is it tying very nicely to the let's say, cooperation between different teams within the company. Long time ago, not so long, but in olden times, when the developer would like to enhance their application and for example build something new, it was quite a process. So usually they started by going to the guys who are managing virtualized infrastructure or servers, so to the operational guys, and they're saying, hey, could you please deploy a virtual machine for me? Then they were knocking on the door of the networking guys and saying, hey, I would need actually the connectivity to this machine. And then they were knocking on the door to the security guys and saying, hey, would you be so kind to make sure that the ports are open in a correct way? It was quite a process. The developer was being dependent on quite a bunch of people on the way, and it literally took weeks. And if you think about the agility, speed being as close to the market and responding to the market needs as possible, you can imagine that is absolutely not sufficient. And this is the case. So currently, developers, they are getting a little bit more freedom. A little bit is absolutely not sufficient here, right? So they're getting loads of freedom on different areas because they are actually the guys who are delivering the application. So one of the things which they can use, for example, are templates. IAC templates, it's called infrastructure as code template. So all the things which I was describing you at the beginning, which are connected to providing the underlying infrastructure for the application, where in the past they needed to ask different people for it. Now they are independent. They are able actually to code step by step the whole infrastructure which needs to be spin up. Sounds fantastic, right? From speed perspective, agility perspective, it sounds great. The issue is, and I really hope I'm not offending any potential developer which is in the audience. In most of the cases, developers, they don't care that much about security. Sometimes they don't even have, let's say, like competencies, and this is absolutely not their fault. Their job mainly is, and they are being paid on, and their KPIs are around providing good code. So they're not security specialists. So imagine you're the developer, you want to make sure that the application is implemented as quickly as possible. So you don't care about those ports, right? The easiest thing is to open the application from infrastructure perspective as much as possible. Everything will be connected. Everything will communicate without issues. Sounds good, right? Yes, but if you're a security person, you're already face palming or grabbing your hair, because you know that from the perspective of segmentation, visibility, and having a control over your network, over this concept of least privilege and making sure that we are creating the environment where minimal sufficient amount of traffic is being allowed to process. This is such a bad idea, right? But this is how it is. The issue with infrastructure as code templates is, since developers are very clever and effective, in most of the cases, they are writing the template once, and every time they can reuse it, they are reusing it. If you have 100 developers, in most of the cases, they will be sharing the templates within one another. So you are ending up with one template being used in most of the cases with quite a bunch of people. And imagine if you have this one small mistake at the, let's say, level of the template. Maybe it's not even explicitly a mistake. I would rather call it a misconfiguration or too broad privileges when it comes to certain access. This one mistake can end up with literally thousands or more of alerts, which a security person need to take care of, right? So that's why the shift left approach and also implementing certain security features at different levels of the development of the application, it's predominantly important for the security people. They cannot anymore let the developers do what they want. The developers would love it, but from the security perspective, from the perspective of the application being in the end implemented in the production environment with access also in many cases for external people, this is something which needs to be managed, right? In many cases, when we are speaking to the customers, especially if you, for example, reach out to security operations center, network operations center teams, unfortunately, they are extremely overwhelmed with number of the alerts which they need to manage. And rightly so, right? And we can do actually quite a bunch when it comes to automation, taking care of what's in the, let's say, running infrastructure. From application perspective, we call it runtime. But if you go for this shift left approach and you kill some certain mistakes at the very beginning and make sure they are not occurring, then the number of potential alerts which you need to manage is significantly lowered, right? And this is just an example. I'm in most of the cases, I'm going for this infrastructure as code example because with open ports, especially to the practitioners who had the opportunity to manage the network, open, close ports, and so on. I think this is quite, let's say, vivid. But it's the same with potential vulnerabilities, right? If you have a developer who is building the application and they are going for an image of a virtual machine, in many cases, they're not checking if this is the most recent image. Does it have a known vulnerabilities? Is there a available patch or available update? No, they will just reach out, take the operating system and so on, right? And implement it in the environment. So in many cases, what we are seeing is an increased cooperation between those two teams, three teams, depending on if you have developers and operations combined together or you have DevSecOps, to make sure that we are actually providing security guide rails for the developers so that they can still do their work, but they are doing it in a secure way. So for example, I can say, hey, from the perspective of infrastructure, you would like to use the image which is vulnerable, but there is already a new version available. Please use this one, right? So that then you as a security person, you're not being forced to do the patching in the production. But there is also additional advantage here. I mentioned to you the example of a bank at the very beginning where the developers we really don't like to have any security tooling. which is controlling us. If you dig into the processes of the company, what we are seeing in many cases, this security check is coming anyways. In the case of this customer, the developer was very happily developing their code, but then, as you can imagine, before putting the application to the production, the pen testing was imposed by the security department anyways. So imagine the situation, developer is spending quite a bunch of time doing the development process. It's going to the pen testing stage, and the security people are saying, this is actually so vulnerable that we need to put it back to you and you need to provide certain changes which we are listing. So if you look at it, the total time of delivery of the application, if you have a security people who are anyways doing some checks before implementing application in the production, making it available, it's enhanced anyway, right? So this is a little bit of a misconception in many cases, but if the developer is being pushed, let's say, a little bit more into the security direction, it's making his life harder. In reality, it's making their life easier, because if they know from the start, I cannot open this ports, I cannot, for example, use this operating system, and from the beginning, I'm using the image which is not vulnerable, then the delivery time, especially, and that was the case of this customer, is actually being decreased. So I think it's very good to have it at the back of your mind. So when it comes to the people themselves, we are also seeing that in many cases, cloud migration, discussing about cloud native, it can also mean very different things, right? So for example, for cloud architect, migrating to the cloud means they are utilizing this mix of different methods when it comes to application integration, and for example, depending on the budget, on the underlying technology, and the compliance as well, each method can take actually a very different path, right? And from the perspective of infrastructure itself, as you can see, in most of the cases, customers are really looking forward to using some cloud native serverless platform as a service technologies, and it should even increase during next time. For the developers, the potential migration to the cloud is an opportunity in most of the cases, especially on the side of acceleration when it comes to the life cycle itself. I mentioned to you that more than 70% of our responders are saying that they are doing the updates of the code on a weekly basis. But also, I think it was almost like 40% were saying we do it on a daily basis, right? So you can imagine that from the perspective of the agility development, it's actually quite a dynamic environment. And if you think about this going to increase even more, you can predict that the biggest hurdle is going to be for a security guy. And this is absolutely consistent with some of the discussions which we are having in the region. It seems like worldwide, the feedback is that the biggest issue with the security is that in many cases, it's not able to follow the very dynamic cloud or cloud native environment. Because even if you focus on just on, let's say, virtual machines, containers, and so on, being deployed wherever, on-prem as well. I'll give you an example. I have an e-commerce customer who is using auto-scaling. So in the moments where the interest of their clients, of their customers is increasing, and the application is being used much more, the architecture and the application itself is reacting on a enhanced workload there, right? So another virtual machines, another containers are being, let's say, added in an automated way to manage this additional interest. So especially, for example, around Christmas, around Valentine's Days, and so on, they were telling me they are seeing spikes when it comes to cloud usage and additional resources being deployed. And from the perspective of the security, if you're going for a very traditional methods and you have those spikes in usage from application perspective, from infrastructure perspective, this is quite a challenge because you can go two ways, so three ways, but from the perspective of the traditional infrastructure, it's two. So you either have a security infrastructure, which is a little bit underscaled, but you're not paying unnecessarily for those peaks. But in a moment of this additional interest, you need to make compromises to make sure that your application is still available and to make sure that the security solution is not a bottleneck. Or you have an infrastructure which is permanently overscaled to be able to handle the additional interest at the moment of peak, right? So you can see even here at this example, but this is additional, let's say, headache for a security professionalist. My recommendation here would be to go for a little bit, let's say, different approach to make sure that you also have a security solution which is auto-scaling, right? So then it's adjusting dynamically if needed from the perspective of processing additional traffic in the public cloud or in a virtualized, for example, a virtualized environment. So when it comes to the application itself, and as you can see, we call it velocity of the cloud, definitely something needs to be done. And of course, I'm not even mentioning some additional challenges, which are, for example, around compliance, right? So compliance in most of the cases for the customers, it's quite a huge challenge. When we are both speaking about moving to the cloud, but also from the perspective of private cloud, if you're processing any data, which are including, let's say, sensitive information, to make sure that you're staying compliant and you're able also to prove it, could also be challenging, right? So with so many changes, one of my customers told me that in the past, they used to hire for quite a bunch of money external company, which was doing auditing of their infrastructure. But they said, currently, if you take into the account containers and virtual machines, plus the cloud potentially, the moment such report is landing on the desk, since the infrastructure is so dynamic and changing so frequently, to a certain extent, this report is already not relevant, right? Because something is changed. So the possibility really to react on the fly and to have certain sensors as, let's say, broadly implemented into the infrastructure as possible, it's really becoming important. When it comes to the challenges, I have presented this presentation a few times already, and when I'm saying that the average ratio of number of developers to the security people is 10-1, I had some customers rolling their eyes and saying we would be so lucky if it would be only 10-1, right? So if you think from the security perspective to manage it, to find, let's say, this common ground of collaboration, if you have so many people chipping in and changing the infrastructure, and you're not going for shift left approach and managing your developer, this could be extremely challenging from our perspective. So think about it in your cases. How is it looking? How many potential additional challenges can you get? I also have customers who are, for example, not having their internal developers, but for example, their companies are using third-party company to deliver the application, or it is split it also, right? So some of the customers are having developers who are doing part of the application in-house, but for certain apps, parts of the apps, this is being developed externally. And this is also quite a challenge, right? Because if you're getting this information, this application from the third-party company, you need to also make sure that the moment you are now taking the responsibility of this application, it is being deployed in a correct, secured way. And if there are any vulnerabilities, then actually you as a security person are responsible for patching it, right? So in general, the discussion about the responsibility and the responsibility model, if you have own developers, external developers, cloud provider, your infrastructure as well, this is something also which each company needs to go through when it comes to their own processing, right? So especially for cloud computing, for cloud native infrastructure, in most of the cases, it is following a shared responsibility model. And this is in many cases when it comes to, for example, public cloud providers, it's very openly stated by them. So, for example, responsibility for the infrastructure, so like compute, networking, storage, and so on, is being held within cloud service provider, and the responsibility for security is actually being shared between cloud service provider and the customer, right, and the client. But the sharing stops when it comes to responsibility for the application itself, for the data, for the access management, right? So whenever we are touching upon any, let's say, organization security, development teams, and so on, this collaboration and very, let's say, thorough awareness when it comes to I am responsible for processing the data within my company. It needs to be very, very clearly defined, and in general, teams needs to be equipped with the resources which they need, which are necessary to understand the challenges which they are facing, and also giving them the possibility to react accordingly, right? Most of the topics which are seeing here in certain extent, I think we covered, but just so that you have a full awareness on it, right? So modern applications are extremely complicated from the perspective of infrastructure, of different locations where the application is being implemented. Challenges are coming in most of the cases from lack of visibility. So the traditional tools which customers were using for their infrastructure, if you take into the consideration different workloads, different locations, different traffic patterns, and so on, it's becoming challenging, and you need a little bit a different approach. But also, the second point which you are seeing here, this is also quite a hurdle, right? So lack of, our company is calling it lack of talent, but I wouldn't say it's lack of talent. In many cases, us as security specialists or architecture people, we are still, let's say, on the verge when it comes to getting accustomed to totally new, different approaches when it comes to the security and infrastructure, right? So it's more about needing time to make sure that your skills are up to date and you're able to, let's say, to meet certain challenges which are currently imposed, especially from the perspective of security people. For me, also coming from the firewall world, certain approaches to, let's say, cloud native security are actually ringing a bell. because, I don't know, 15 years ago, when it comes to network security, we used to have a situation where you had layer 3, layer 4 protection, separated layer 7 protection or web application firewalling, also separated. IDS, IPS implemented as well, right? So loads of point products which were trying to give you insight of what's going on in your network, traditional network infrastructure. But those tools were not entirely connected into one another. And I really do believe that correlation is power, and certain small events which are, let's say, treated separately, if you correlate them and you have a full overview of what's going on in your infrastructure, it's really giving you a power, but predominantly a possibility to react quickly if needed, right? So from cloud perspective, if you're not, for example, imposing some user behavioral analysis, you can skip certain things. So if, for example, in most of the cases, I'm reaching out to my cloud resources, more or less from 9 to 5, but from European region, if suddenly I'm reaching out from China, middle of the night, middle of the weekend, for example, this is something which you need to be alerted on, right? And if you're able also to correlate this information with the information on which resources I am trying to reach out to, what I'm trying to do in this infrastructure, what are my privileges? So this is giving you a very powerful tool, not only to be able to, let's say, pick those events, but also to react very quickly and make sure that certain blind spots are not present in your infrastructure, which, if you take into account this massive complexity, which we were mentioning before, this could be really, really problematic. So when it comes to good practices around cloud native and cloud security in nowadays, I don't know what's your, let's say, approach here, but those 5 mentioned, which are coming as a result of the reporting I was mentioning, I think they are pretty on point, right? So the security is not an option anymore, so it needs to be really implemented, but also from the perspective of collaboration between different people. It's not like you're able to work anymore in a separate silos. In many cases, what we are seeing is it's also a very valid and modern term is DevSecOps. So basically, you have interdisciplinary teams which are collaborating, and you have in one team developers, security people, operational people, sometimes also some additional members of the team, which are responsible for application or a part of application being delivered in a very holistic way. This is connected also to this whole agility approach, but this is that if it's implemented correctly, I have seen it being extremely, extremely effective, and this collaboration is really needed here. Of course, it's coming with some challenges, especially I have seen some challenges around the communication, because the developers in most of the cases, they're not that much aware of security, but also for the security people to be able to say, hey, this action on your side as a developer, it's actually the cause of a vulnerability being implemented into our infrastructure. That's so valuable, right? So it's rather collaborating and let's say being very specific rather than pointing fingers and blaming. Shift left approach, I mentioned it, it's absolutely vital when it comes to collaboration, but also effectiveness when it comes to imposing security measures for modern app. Security is always connected with visibility. Visibility is always first step. So this would be also super important. Getting correct tools, but also getting correct knowledge, staying up to date, Some people are not so happy about it, but I think that's what's making our job so interesting, that you cannot stay comfortable, you cannot stay lazy. You need to stay educated and you need to evolve with the right tools, right? So, yeah, so as you can see, this factor has changed quite a lot, because if you think about the security, yeah, visibility is a good first step, a necessary first step, but it's a first step only. So being able to react on many different levels, like mentioned, it's absolutely crucial. And we have seen actually the capability to respond factor dropping, right? So because of this complexity, it's becoming more and more challenging for the customers to react, which is very, very concerning, right? Because if you look at so many different, let's say, infrastructure potential issues which are implemented, which are part of the infrastructure, it's really giving you quite a bunch of different, let's say, things which needs to be taken care of, especially also from the perspective of a timely manner. When it comes to the factors, maybe I will skip it, because my intention is also being cautious of the time, to share with you some of the examples of very important, let's say, good practices, which were shared by the customers. So the path forward, that's definitely something which I would need to focus on from this perspective. So when it comes to the security solution, I fully believe, like 15 years ago, where it was turning head into the next generation firewalls, previously into UTM solutions, but also when it comes to securing the cloud native infrastructure, the platform approach is really coming with a loads of benefits. Because first of all, it's giving you the option to have the visibility on many different levels, regardless of the underlying infrastructure, meaning different workloads, private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, and so on. Plus also, most importantly, the capability to react upon it, right? And if you also even extend this platform approach into being able to having the visibility also into the different stages of application life cycle, that could also be a life savior, and it could also optimize very heavily what is being needed from the perspective of a developer. I gave you some examples when it comes to infrastructure as code. I gave you some examples when it comes to vulnerabilities, how they are traversing the network. I will also show you some of the practical examples in a second, right? Continuous visibility, which is a challenge if you take into account the issues which are connected to ever-changing environment from the perspective of auto-scaling, many people which are actually contributing into the changes into the infrastructure. This could be extremely challenging, but at the same time, it's an absolute necessity to be fully aware of what's going on when it comes to your infrastructure, plus then imposing the prevention. As maybe let's say something interesting for you from the perspective of Palo Alto Networks, we have a dedicated team which is called Unit 42, which is doing comprehensive research when it comes to different threats. We are doing also loads of collection of information around different incidents when it comes to the infrastructure, so detection of whole malware campaigns, some 0 days, and so on. And this then is being spread when it comes to the signatures and different security measures within different tools which can be used by the customer, right? So I would also, if you are a professional interested in the threat detection itself, our Unit 42, they have their own blog which they are analyzing in certain cases, certain malware campaigns, which is extremely good source of knowledge, also deep dive from technical perspective. So good to take a look as it. Cloud journey and security, this is also a super nice topic because in many cases, what customers are sharing is we really need to stay prepared for what's coming ahead. So being able to have a security tooling, which is also, let's call it cloud native, and is able to, like I was mentioning to you, expand if needed, if the infrastructure is changing, collapse if needed, so that you're not overpaying. This is such a value from the business perspective. But also, if your infrastructure is changing, and for example, I'm speaking to people who are just planning migration to the cloud. From their business perspective, they are sometimes getting statement, we need to be ready for cloud migration so that security is following our application regardless where the application is residing, right? So this is one of the good practices which definitely you should consider to have at the back of your head. Tool consolidation, sorry, this is definitely something to consider, right? To make sure that taking into account so many different challenges which we were covering today, you're still staying on top of things, having the full visibility, and also you're able to prepare the answer which will be spreaded evenly. When it comes to the conclusions on the report, like mentioned, there are certain topics, but maybe let me go directly into certain, let's say, examples of good practices which I have from the customers. So I had one customer who was, for example, telling me, if we are speaking about modern application, which is so complex, the very important thing for them was to have an application context. So if you, for example, have multiple workloads, multiple locations and so on, and you have your C-level person saying, hey, could you please tell me what's the state of our crucial application which our business is relying on, to be able to have the visibility to pull all the information and be able to say, this is the state, this is the security state, this is compliance state from the application perspective. It's such a good insight, right? So keep this at the back of your mind, that sometimes, yeah, infrastructure is important, but also having this additional lenses from the business perspective could make your life much, much easier. When it comes to, let's say, reacting, which I covered today quite a lot, super cool thing is to be able to provide fixes also at the different stage of the application development. I was giving you this example with, for example, with infrastructure as code templates. You can fix the template, so you can push for fixing in the code. But imagine the situation that your business is pushing for application update regardless of everything, because, I don't know, competitors are stepping on your feet and they are really pushing for some additional features to be implemented. So the business decision is, yeah, application is not perfect, but let's put it into the production. You as a security team, you're responsible for fixing it. That actually fixing it both in the code and in the cloud, meaning in the runtime, with as little effort as possible, that could be really, really valuable from your perspective. And also having this, let's say, comfort of reacting quickly. For many of the customers, it's let's say, really, really crucial. Important thing when it comes to the security customer feedback is vulnerability management. So in general, if you're going for application scanning and checking on what's going on from the perspective of potentially vulnerable parts of the application, you can be absolutely overwhelmed. So in many cases, really, like you can see at this example, number of potential vulnerabilities to be fixed can be really, really immense. And as a security person, you need to start somewhere, right? So to have, let's say, indefinite amount of time to be able to provide certain fixes, that's a way too comfortable situation, which is not the case for most of us. But to be able to make, let's say, informative decision, this could be such a value. So, for example, if you're a developer, in most of the cases when developers are building the application, they are taking different building blocks, in many cases, parts of the applications and code, which are available freely on the internet. But then, as you can see, not all of those packages are being in use. If a package is not in use, although the vulnerability is present there, if the package is not in use, but from the attacker perspective, you're not able to effectively actually exploit this vulnerability, right? So if you're a security person, a good thing to start and good practice would be, let's see which packages are in use and vulnerable, and also they have vulnerabilities which are exploitable but patchable, right? And if you have certain approach like this, you can actually decrease the number of, let's say, workload on you as a security person quite significantly. But also to have like a complete overview of your environment and being very conscious how different issues are affecting your application can be extremely helpful as well. For example, if I am aware that a certain CVE is critical, but also is, for example, affecting loads of my crucial application servers or virtual machines, this is something which I need to deal with from the very first moment, right? So making sure that you're able to assign priorities to act accordingly. And also, like mentioned on the previous slide, fixing code, fixing cloud, or fixing the infrastructure, that could really make your life easier. Extra important thing for some of the customers is being aware when it comes to, for example, how certain issues, how certain vulnerabilities are being even introduced into their infrastructure. So as you can see, I can take the CVE, for example, and to be able to track it through this whole life cycle of application development is giving me very nice consciousness, is giving me, coming to the previous slides, ability to react, but also I can also go then and make people responsible, right? So I can impose certain things on a developer. I can do some repository scanning maybe, and also make sure that I don't have vulnerable images which are being implemented there. I can, in the runtime, if I'm being forced to implement an application, I can also make sure, for example, that I'm implementing virtual patching or patching itself of a vulnerable image, right? So to be very conscious and very aware of how the vulnerabilities and how threats are impacting your application from code to cloud should be also very, very crucial. Last but not least, my friend now is saying that you cannot nowadays have a presentation and not say AI. And I won't be any different here. Artificial intelligence, it's really helpful, especially if you're being challenged and if you're being forced to maintain such a complex infrastructure and such a complex environment like cloud native applications. The good thing is that a little bit similar to how some of the people are, for example, using ChatGPT, asking questions in a normalized language, loads of modern tools are also providing such capabilities, which are extremely helpful. So I have a good example of good old Log4j here, which loads of the customers were infected like year, 2 years ago. And still, this is something which is, even for a non-technical C-level person, this is something which they can relate to. And as you can see in the example here, I don't even anymore as a security practitioner need to dig out, or even worse, remember the exact number of CVE which was connected to Log4j. Because luckily, the modern system is able actually to identify it for you. The good thing is, like I was showing you before on the slides before, if you're able to have a full understanding how your application is being built and developed from the moment which is being, when it is being coded and put together from different blocks, let's say, and then implemented in the production environment, then I can actually get additional insight and say, hey, this vulnerability was actually introduced into your environment via a certain package. It is present in certain pipelines when it comes to the application development, certain images, and as the effect, it's affecting this number of machines, of containers which are running in your environment, right? So a really good, let's say, drill down analysis of a potential issues is able to be presented, right? The nice thing is that also a little bit like with ChatGPT, in many cases, you're also able to interact with the tool. So it's not longer the case when you're on your own and you need to go, for example, step by step, implement virtual patches, log into different, let's say, public cloud firewalls to, for example, change the security rules. The beauty of the cloud, beauty of having everything automated is that you can also have, for example, bidirectional communication via API. So in many cases, within just single click, you can impose those changes which will actually help you, right? And by no means we are going for, let's say, replacing the administrator, replacing the security person. In many cases, you see those security tools and automated AI security tools being called co-pilots, because still the main pilot is the security person. But because of this immense complexity, which I was mentioning, when it comes to modern application, being forced to be aware not only of the infrastructure, but also a little bit now about the coding, how the developers are working, how the cloud is working, your life can really be easier and your life can really be supported with usage of modern tools. Just also to give you additional sneak peek and maybe some good practices. If you're one of those people who are actually sharing their responsibilities internally when it comes to application security, maybe also giving those developers a little bit of a sneak peek how the infrastructure is looking from the security perspective to make them aware, but also to point fingers and say, for example, hey, here are potential issues from the perspective of your coding, your infrastructure, your templates which you are using. This could also, even let's say tighten the potential collaboration, but also let the security people offload a little bit of the work, but in a secure way, right? So let's say providing the right tooling also for your colleagues and tightening the collaboration is absolutely possible as well. Here is the nice summary of the reporting, which I was mentioning today. I'll be more than happy to share the whole report with you as well. Like mentioned, it's quite comprehensive. It's very fresh. when it comes to different threats and information on application security. So please reach out to us. I will point you to the right direction. But in general, from the very high level, when it comes to the complexity of modern architecture, it definitely is needing a certain modern response, pushing the application and pushing the security as close to the workload as possible to be able to provide full visibility and zero trust also when the customer is moving to the cloud, is having hybrid infrastructure or containers and virtualized implementation of their application. Plus on top, with 10-to-1 ratio at least of developers versus security practitioners, some additional help for security people, whether we are speaking about having a full visibility and access when it comes to different tooling also, which is being used by the developers, and giving them the capabilities to create those safe guide rails, or using additional co-pilots to automate certain tasks and make your life easier, that's definitely available and should be treated as a good practice. And last but not least, security cannot be an afterthought. So really, if you go for this shift left approach and try to impose security measures from the very beginning, then at the end, when the application is already running in the production environment, a security person can focus on the things which are actually relevant for their job, and not just, stitching and patching and putting down fires, which are being caused by certain, for example, misconfigurations or issues at the very early stages of application development. So don't make this mistake and look at the whole picture. Okay, from presentational perspective, this is all for me. I can see that there are none of the questions in the chat. So I would like to ask, is there anything which you would like to ask currently?
You can raise your hand, or you can directly jump into the conversation. Thank you very much, Eva. It was really interesting to see some numbers, and maybe until one of the colleagues will decide to raise any question, I would come back on the ratio, the number of developers versus the number of the security team members. My initial thought was that this ratio should be, it is a guess and maybe an expectation in the same time, should be proportional with the maturity level of the organization, right? Is, in your experience, 10-to-1 is a good ratio, or this can be improved, or is it satisfactory? How do you find it?
It is how it is, right? So I would not impose any judgment, because let me give you an example of us as Palo Alto Networks. Internally, we have also a security department, and we have a security operational center. And frankly speaking, our company has grown massively during last years, but we are not getting that many additional security specialists. And the reason for it is we have loads of automation, which is being imposed at the SOC level and at the level of networking operations center as well. Let me give you an example. So currently you have tools which are connected to automation, like SOAR or XORs, which are basically enabling the administrator to create something which is called playbook. In general, playbook is a scenario. So if anything is happening in my network, please react in a certain way.
Sure.
And modern tools like this are able to take information from the endpoint, from the cloud, from the networking infrastructure, basically from everywhere, and also provide answer to all of those points. So if you have a clever security administrator, which is relying heavily on automation, yes, at the level of the implementation of such tool, they will spend hours, weeks, months, sometimes writing these playbooks. But then their life can be really comfortable, right? So in many cases, they can really I'm really don't want to say replace people, right? Because it's not the case of replacing, but in many cases, you don't need additional people, for example, for managing the more complex infrastructure. And you can still be effective, you can still prevent breaches, and you can still manage your infrastructure sufficiently. You just need to do it clever, right? So for me, the person who has a good understanding when it comes to security and is able actually to keep up with modern tools, it's such an incredible asset for the company. And then this ratio is, that's why it's a little bit hard to answer the question directly if this is good or bad. Because, you know, if you have 100 bad security people, it's worse than 1 or 2 clever guys, right? So yeah, that's why it's a little bit complicated.
Absolutely. But in the same time, I totally agree. Nothing is 0 or 1 exclusively. There are so many gray areas, even though digitally speaking, we are talking about 0, 1, and 1. But your response actually is supporting the idea that if you go for the automation, that means your maturity level or your openness, or, you know, it actually, you responded to me indirectly, and I will take it as a yes. There should be a proportionality.
Yeah, I would say so. At the same time, I was speaking last week with my friend who is a developer, and he said, you know what, we are very comfy years, sorry, when it comes to our career. Developers are being paid very reasonably, right? And they are also very demanding when it comes to certain, let's say, conditions, and very rightly so. But also now, automation is going into their area, right? So they are saying we really need to step up, because if we are able to automate certain aspects of application development, of process development, then maybe we can be reduced as well. And this is very sadly being also visible if you look to the West. Even the giants like Google, sometimes they are announcing layoffs on the developers' side, because they are able also to let's say, automate using AI or different tools their job, right? So by no means I'm saying that AI is imposing a threat. I think we will need to learn a little bit to work differently, maybe to work smarter, and let's see how it's gonna end up. But I have a feeling definitely that it will change the workforce as we know it currently.
Totally agree with you. But as you mentioned, we need to think differently and to act and react differently. Because if you ask me, of course, I would be very happy to have somebody to do my work. And of course, I would be interested in doing something, but maybe something different, something more valuable. I would like to get rid of everything I don't like, and maybe it's a routine or it's not bringing me whatever, and can be done by somebody else with not so wide experience or whatever. So totally agree with you. I'm concerned also about the time, but I would link this conversation with the area of having skilled people, how much the organizations invest in, let's say, training programs to ensure they are keeping up with the pace of the technology, because the feeling everywhere is on one hand side, you have this dynamic and all the organizations, or yeah, most of the organizations, they are complaining they don't find the appropriate specialists for those kind of emerging technologies. But in the same time, it should be proportional, or we should take a look also on the internal dynamic within the organization. It is true that there should be a balance. You mentioned it, the AI tool and different other automations tool, but just complaining and not doing too much internally on emerging technology, on cloud security, on, there is still room for improvement, taking a look on the numbers, 40, 34, 34, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
On the types of, let's say, approaches to move to cloud, there is a huge area to be covered. Would you support the idea of the same idea, again, proportionality, maturity, investments? How do you see it?
You know what? So from the perspective of investment, I couldn't agree more. So this is nothing to do with technology. My personal opinion is that to keep good people, you need to keep investing in them. And definitely, if you look at all the trends, it seems like investing into cloud skills, into some automation skills, this should be a priority. So I would very strongly encourage any of the people who are attending the call today to look into this area. If we were lucky, we are having the employers who are taking care of it and they have a good understanding that also some additional training is needed, because to be fair, this is cloud and cloud native. This is such a different animal compared to traditional network infrastructure. But the expectation that the person will acquire the skills just by their own, it's absolutely not fair. So even from the timing perspective, if I'm speaking to some of my customers who are focused on network security, they are saying we are so overloaded with daily tasks that to acquire additional skills, we need to have a support of the employer to be able to carve this time. And it could be seen problematic, I totally get it, but I really believe that long term, even from the perspective of the employer, from the business, to make sure that your people are fully educated, you're not acquiring this, what some people say, technological debt when it comes to your infrastructure, but also with those new skills, those people are pushing for new approaches, having your application, your infrastructure modern, secure, up to date, and ahead of competitors. It's only coming with advantages. So yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm a biggest evangelist when it comes to enabling people first, and rather than looking around. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions? No raised hands, no additional questions in the chat.
I need to make a joke. They are either all sleeping,
please.
or yeah, you're either all sleeping, or it was so good explained that you don't have any questions. And I'm the optimist by nature, so I'll go with a second option here.
Excellent. I would go for, let's say, I don't want to, me personally, to close the conversation. I would be very happy for you to close the conversation. But I would say that on my way home, probably, I will keep thinking on that percentage, 90% of the organizations, let me check, cannot detect, contain, and resolve cyber threats within an hour. Should I read this, all of them within an hour? Because I guess at least detection should happen based on the event management systems. At least they should be detected real time.
Oh,
How
absolutely. Absolutely. That's the
all of
ideal
them,
word,
the
right?
detection, contain, that to detect, contain, and resolve. Okay, resolution is something
Yeah.
else, agree, but anyhow, 90% is a bit worrying.
It is absolutely, especially if you think about, because we are speaking a lot of about automation AI and so on. And we are speaking as, let's say, good people, or at least officially, we are staying on a good side of let's say, a barricade here. But you need to keep in mind that all this automation tool and enabling work faster and most efficiently are also being used by the attacker, right? So this is what we are seeing also quite extensively, that if you're not able to detect, like you very rightly said, threats in a real time, block them almost in a real time, and be very quick on it, then you really have a problem. Things which were acceptable few years ago from the perspective of detection and response, currently it's way too late, right? If I would show this, if I show this slide a few years ago about not being able to provide response within an hour, most of my customers will be like, no, shrugging their arms and saying it's okay, right? But currently, if you have, for example, a attacker which are expansively for last years using zero-day attacks, polymorphic attacks, which are actually, or polymorphic malware, sorry, which is actually changing each time when it's being implemented in the infrastructure. It's not that easy to detect. It's highly automated and it's highly efficient. So from the perspective of business, which in many cases is relying on also, let's say, image, how they are processing the data and so on, this could be extremely harmful, right? So this is, for me, this number is only emphasizing that you need some clever tooling, you need clever, skilled people, and you need to stay on top of things currently. And this is actually, if you take into account the extensive complexity which we have currently from the perspective of application and infrastructure, this can be absolutely challenging. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eva. I am asked whether the slides will be available after the presentation. For sure, the recording will be available. It will be made available by my colleagues on YouTube channel, and I'm not sure which other channel, but for sure on it will be available. I'm not sure about the slides. However, if you have the recording, the slides are included somehow.
I can also share with you the slides, no worries about it. And I'll also share or include it maybe in the slide deck, a link for the report itself. There are loads of additional interesting details. If you have some time to go through it, I will very highly encourage it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation with you and also the presentation you shared with us. Thank you very much for your support and for accepting our invitation. And keep in touch. And have
Thank you so much. And to any of the participants today, if you come up with any additional questions, remarks, complaints, or you need anything.
Complaints.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully not. Please feel free to reach out or LinkedIn or via other channels. So yeah. Thank you so much, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Have a very nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump off then, okay?
Okay, good. Bye.